it is very important to say that POLAD is a political institution. So its achievements must be looked at in the world of politics and say that from a political environment, what are the achievements? First and foremost, politically, POLAD has promoted the principle of a multi-party state. That is very important. So I will say multi-partyism. Multi-partyism is the very important understanding that democracy requires the proliferation of political players, and that there must be more than one political player. So it's more than one. More important in Zimbabwe, more than two. So the mere existence of POLAD shows you that there are not two parties here. There are not three parties. There are many parties, and that is important that happens. It engenders and promotes democracy. The second one is a spirit of dialogue for national development. I mean, you need to exchange ideas. The best ideas come out of a dialogue process, and that has happened not very successfully in the sense that some of the ideas coming out of those platforms have not been implemented or been accepted. Then outside the political world, POLAD has been very critical in contributing economic ideas to what we can call the economic turnaround. It has been very much engaged with foreign currency processes. How do you go about those things? Quite speaking out always in closed circles against increased levels of corruption, and more importantly, ensuring that government intensifies its devolution process that has been coming out of. So, yeah, those are the things that I can put out across. There is a very critical setback. It is the slow pace of reforms in the electoral area and in the political area. When we started at the beginning, we were very upbeat that we will, before the 2023 elections, have full-blown reforms in the electoral field. POLAD since agreed to about 16 proposals to amend the Electoral Act or to change electoral laws. Up to now, not much movement has taken place in that regard. But right from day one, we were aware that POLAD was an avenue through which we could pass our ideas to the president and the government. So it was not important that POLAD be put into the constitution or that the POLAD arrangement be recognized through an act of parliament as POLAD. What was recognized through the institutions that we have already is the fact that the president's executive authority extends to inviting various groups to meet with them, which is what has happened to POLAD. So I would not think that the absence of a formal structure, that's how I would put it, affected our delivery, because we were still able to put across our ideas, and that those ideas may not have been taken up in some areas was not because of the absence of a formal structure. Well, I think the majority of the people accept POLAD. There are those who are resisting POLAD. There are groups that are partisan. These are supporters of political parties that chose not to be part of POLAD. So whenever I interact with people myself, I am able to realize that the ordinary person there who is not politically partisan, who is not an active participant in party politics, they appreciate the value and role of POLAD. So if I'm saying why, I mean the resistance is that it's partisan politics. There are those who decided to see POLAD as a particular faction of our politics and that they were in a different faction. So they've from day one been criticizing POLAD quite viciously. Some of the criticisms make sense, but many of the other criticisms are really partisan political criticism. It depends on the angle. If you are looking at the political dimension, I think that the achievements we have made are very long-term and very important, which is the achievement, the very fact that there must be multipartism, that there must be active political engagement, there must be dialogue, that deepening of our democratic culture. People will reap fruits from it. But of course, the other achievements that I'm talking about, these are more in the realm of what the government of the day could do. So the limitations came from the failure by the government of the day, the ZANU-PF government, to implement very good ideas that they were given. Generally, we meet just about like once in 3 months or so. We meet as a what is called executive plenary, but that has not been the case in the past few months. I think that POLAD's life is coming to an end as we are approaching the elections. Sooner or later, there will not be more POLAD meetings because we're just about a year to the next election, in fact less than a year to the next election. So when the president proclaims dates for the election, the life of POLAD will also come to an end. So we've been meeting with a monitoring mechanism that is keeping on informing us where we've made progress and where we have not. I've told you that we have not yet made progress in respect of issues to do with electoral reforms. You also know that some of the political parties in POLAD, in fact many of them, are complaining about the issues that you know relating to the ZEC's gazetted fees for next year's participation in the elections. We are still to meet as POLAD. We in the NCA have sent out some request for our other political parties to meet so we can meet the president within the context of POLAD and see how far we can go in lobbying ZEC to review those rates. And that is again an indication that sometimes we are not very effective. Our political parties generally represent the people to the extent that they represent the views that they have as political parties, which they believe are shared by a significant amount of people. You must not confuse electoral support and political representation. Those are two different things. A person has always one vote. So if I were to give you an example, you might actually appreciate what I stand for and support what I do. But when you get to the ballot box, because you have one vote, you might prefer that for that election you vote for someone else for other reasons. That doesn't mean that you will not support what I stand for. So it is wrong to say if you didn't have a political, I mean, when people voted in 2018, they were voting taking into account considerations of who was to become president in 2018, who was to become a member of parliament. People were saying that they were against every idea of every person who is not one that they were voting for. That's not how a political democracy works or a constitutional democracy works. So we have many supporters. So we represent both those that support us. So even if they are 0.1% of the electorate, people are aware that people who vote are merely a fraction of the entire population. So for example, we had 4.4 million people, 4.5 million people voted. Zimbabwe at the time had a population of 13 million. Now those that did not cast their vote were obviously going to be bound by the votes given by those that participated. But it doesn't mean that those who are silent out there support the parties that win elections. No. Those who are out there, they support a constitutional democracy, they support multipartyism, they would want a state of affairs where political actors keep engaging. So we have massive support in the country. And the views we represent in POLAD are views that are shared by many. And that those views that are shared by many are not related to what people vote for, because one person is one vote. If we had a situation where people were to be given 5 votes and say, give these votes to the 5 best political parties that you'd want to exist, you'll be shocked that the NCA would have, I'm sure much more than all the parties that exist in the country. So I think I want to say with that argument, people must understand, you cannot say the vote that you you cast in an election determines your life, your view for the next 5 years. On every issue, you are represented by the party that you voted for, whether that party is in government or not. What does that mean? So people voted for the ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF is in parliament, but under our law and under our politics, they must still keep consulting people. Right? If you go by that logic, it would mean that if you vote for someone, just go home and keep quiet. Because if you vote, you remain active. You vote for one person, but you must be able to support another person's views that are beneficial to the country. So that's how I would answer your question. So we have massive support. We would understand that that is a very common political trend, that it's not just for people in Poland, but even for other politicians. I mean, the allegation that a member of parliament is there for the money, or a person in politics, the minister, and they are there for the money, it's an allegation that will be given against every public leader who somewhat gets some benefit of sorts from the taxpayers and so on. So I would not take that allegation seriously. I would regard that allegation as a political attack, which is not peculiar to people in Poland. I would want to challenge anyone out there and say, look, is it only people in Poland who have been said to be in there for the money? I think people will say that, oh, they've heard that being said. Even pastors in the churches, I mean, they preach well, some of them. Some of them, they are accused of being there for the money that they are not called. I mean, I go to a church where someone who is a pastor says, I was called by God to preach the word of God. The next attack that they get normally is that, well, no, this person, they failed to go to university and then decided to be a pastor. They are in it for the money. That's not it. We are not in Poland for the money. We are in Poland out of our very strong belief that we must act. Now, when we got the cars are just there to assist us in the work that we do. The public has a tendency not to appreciate what public officials do on their behalf. And then so public officials also realize that from time to time, they cannot use their own private resources for public discourse. So the vehicles are merely to assist us. They remain government vehicles. These are not our personal properties. They're not private property. They're government property. When POLAD comes to an end, those vehicles will be returned. If they have to be given to the POLAD, the principal, they'll have to, in terms of government rules, they have to buy them in terms of the rules that apply for purchasing a vehicle that you've been using. That law is not ours. It's a law of the country that if you're a public official and we have used a vehicle, I mean, if I've used it like the vehicle that I'm using from POLAD, I don't see why anyone else would really want to use it after 2 years. Most of the vehicles, they are already run down. Well, I must tell the people that within POLAD meetings, ZANU-PF is a very good political party within POLAD meetings. Very warm, very polite. They are never arrogant within POLAD meetings. I only see ZANU-PF arrogance outside POLAD. But within POLAD, they are like any other party. Currently, they don't chair any of the 6 thematic committees that exist within POLAD. It was agreed that ZANU-PF would not chair that, so that we create that. And then they are vice chair, like in my committee, the governance and legislative agenda subcommittee. I'm the chairperson. My vice chairperson is ZANU-PF, Paul Mangwana, who represents ZANU, is the vice chair. And so we go to meetings where we chair. This is why you could have the 16 proposals that POLAD brought, which were actually signed by Honorable Patrick Chinamasa, who is representing President Mnangagwa at the principal's level, and so on. People would be surprised and say, ZANU-PF has agreed to all these things. They have, and they do robust debates. I mean, they are able to put across their argument. So within POLAD, there's no big brother mentality. I would urge them to do that outside POLAD. And I think that those who meet ZANU-PF outside POLAD should try and encourage ZANU-PF to have the culture that it has within, which is why I support those who say that refusing to join POLAD by other political actors was somewhat ill-advised, because we would have seen ZANU-PF behavior in the face of what is sometimes described as the bigger political parties, those that have representation in parliament. So in a POLAD meeting, we work through what are called thematic committees. So the economic subcommittee meets, comes up with proposals which are read out to everyone, and we endorse them. The governance subcommittee, within subcommittees, we invite experts and so forth. So the economic subcommittee, for example, was able to have 2 quite big platforms. One was the economic Indawa subcommittee Indawa. That they made recommendations, some of the recommendations which were taken up by the Ministry of Finance and the Reserve Bank to do, especially with the stabilization of our currency. They've played quite a big role there. Some of the ideas are taken and have been implemented. What we said at the press conference still stands, that we are going to engage ZEC, but we also said at that same press conference that we are going to engage ZEC through first the platform of POLAD. So we have made a request to POLAD for the POLAD principals to meet, and I understand the meeting will be very soon. where we come up with a position, we will come up with a position, and then with that position we will present to POLAD, sorry, to ZEC. But ZEC is already aware of our position, and that I would expect them as an independent body not to be in a corner in which they are arrogant and waiting for a formal engagement. I'd expect them if it will be coming out. I've also had some media interactions. I think yesterday I had something on ZTN with other political parties and a ZEC spokesperson where this debate was taking place. We are aware that ZEC is still, what is standing its ground, putting that in quotes, or still putting it itself in a corner and saying that what they did is right. So we will continue to say that what they did was wrong and that they must not have those fees. If that fails, certainly we will support a legal route. We are not going to leave that thing lying down, certainly. We would only surrender if we lose a court battle. If we lose the ZEC dialogue process, lose a court battle, we still have other battles which are not necessarily, maybe not be called battles. We've indicated that we'll continue to, show that we are unhappy. We are contemplating protest actions with others, not violent demonstrations, but peaceful demonstrations, just to show that we are clearly opposed to this. I have also realized the ZANU-PF is now, of course, outside POLAD, taking the side of ZEC. That's the instinct of ZANU always. They think that they are there to support state institutions. They cannot draw a distinction between themselves and ZEC. And so yesterday I saw that ZANU was all guns blazing, defending that, which is undermining the independence and integrity of ZEC. Because if you have a debate of this nature, and then ZEC is in one corner, and the only party that is coming out supporting them is ZANU-PF, and then the rest of the political parties are on the other side, that's quite not good for the independence of ZEC. I always don't understand these commissioners, that they're in there, supposed to have some common sense. And so what they are doing is a lack of common sense. You can't allow a situation where this issue about nomination fees gets more and more controversial, and you are keeping in digging and you ZEC becoming, coming up with political arguments, like what their spokesperson Jasper was doing. He was busy, because the only way you can defend these nomination fees is to invent a political argument. And that's very dangerous for them. Then as they become more and more political, they are joined by the politicians in the mold of ZANU. Then they become a ZANU-PF baby. But we are going to an election where we don't want that to be happening. So I expect that ZEC will quickly act and show that it is independent. It can even convene a stakeholder meeting on those issues itself, without waiting for us to formally approach it.